GRCSU, and welcome to another episode of Coffee with Coaches. We have taken our reins back, and it's not Tea with Queen Bee this week, but we do have another special guest that we are so excited to have. Lindsay, welcome, and can you maybe tell listeners that don't know where you from?
I am Lindsay Reiter, and I am the literacy coach at Proctor Elementary School. This is my 4th year there. So really excited about some of the work we've been doing.
Awesome. So yes, so Proctor has been doing a lot of work around literacy. And so you are going to share a little bit about that and some of the ways that you are dealing with COVID and social distancing and that sort of thing.
Yes. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. All right. So looking at how to provide varied and engaging ELA activities within COVID restrictions. So I thought I would just start out talking about what our reading block looks like this year. And it is a little bit different than what we've done in the past. So first, I will admit that when I had my own classroom, I was a big proponent of the Daily 5 framework, which I love and found to be very effective. However, with the work that we've been doing this year and our current restrictions, we've gone to a more traditional workshop model. So we've come up with and agreed upon these non-negotiables, including a grade level focus lesson, independent reading, choice reading, writing about reading, and literary talk. So I'll talk a little bit about each of those things here. So our grade level and focus lessons come from using the Common Core standards as a guide, and we've created units of study with those. And the mini lesson is grade level content. So the differentiation will come during small groups and one-on-one conferencing. So that lesson is strictly grade level. Then the students go into independent reading, and we made an agreement that every day kids in K-2 will build up to reading 20 minutes by themselves, and in grades 3 to 6 they will be reading 30 minutes daily in the classroom. Choice reading, we know that student choice is really important. So we found that providing choice gets the students engaged. But also if you're teaching, for instance, we just finished a character unit. So if you're working on characters, having a student read a nonfiction book really doesn't help them practice the skills that you've been teaching. So there are times where we have to provide a little bit more guidance and say maybe in the first half of independent reading, you're reading a fiction book so that you can talk about those characters. And then after that, in the second half, you can read anything that is interesting to you. So that's how we've negotiated that this year. Writing about reading, we need to teach students that reading is thinking, and that gives students the opportunity to grapple with their thinking. So what we're finding is that providing more open-ended questions rather than a targeted prompt is helping kids to give us more information about their thinking. So for example, again, relating to our character unit, instead of asking a student to give us a character trait about the main character, just ask them to talk about the character. So instead of getting a one-word answer, kids are able to really share what they're thinking about the character and have deeper discussions with their classmates about it. So if the student's grasping the material in the focus lesson, they're naturally going to discuss character traits, but they're also going to talk more in depth, as I said. I've encouraged teachers to keep an ongoing anchor chart of the mini lessons so that students can look and respond to a variety of things in their writing. For example, during a character unit, you might teach about traits, empathy, and character change over time. So if those things are listed, then the student can stop while they're reading and in their stop and jots address any of those things that might be relevant in their book at that time. At the end of the block, sharing is the last critical piece. So sharing with a partner works really well so that students are engaged and have the opportunity for their voices and ideas to be heard. We found that turning and talking I call it Teach OK Partners, works really well, even though students are at a distance. When they're explicitly taught those expectations, it doesn't get too loud, and I have found that students are really successful with this. And the last thing, literary talk. It's so important to provide students with opportunities to share their critical thinking about books. So we need to start, first of all, by teaching students how to talk about the books, and then provide that conversation, that opportunity for conversation. It's important that the students are driving that conversation, not the teachers. So I find that giving a prompt such as, what are you thinking right now? It provides time for more conversation between the students, rather than, again, asking for a character trait that's a one-word answer. I know that students can be taught to have respectful conversations and disagree with one another, and that provides great engaging conversation for kids. By teaching them these things, you can have your students work in book clubs, which is something that Proctor is headed towards. K through 6 right now, they're starting their book club units. So it's important for students to be accustomed to driving those conversations rather than us as teachers asking all the questions. I do believe that book clubs are something that we can do in our current situation. And we're thinking that Wednesdays are going to be a great time for those small groups to meet virtually to kind of get around that social distancing issue that we're dealing with right now. Though not a non-negotiable this year, one-on-one conferencing has been used more than small groups in our school so far, which has provided an opportunity to read and discuss books with each student. The conference will look different for each student depending on their needs, but it provides a great time for teachers and students to connect and build a positive relationship with one another. So it is true that students are generally still sitting at their desks, which is not the way many of us often teach. However, we're finding that kids are really engaged in a variety of learning opportunities throughout the block, including engaging read alouds, independent work, student interaction, student choice, and writing about reading. So they're getting opportunities to do different things throughout the block. So I have not noticed students feeling bored or anything like that sitting in one spot. Our word study block looks different in every classroom this year. So in general, grades K to 4 have similar components, but the teachers are putting the block together in different ways. Most classes start with a warm-up, phonological awareness, or a card deck drill, for instance, a blending activity, which might include games, which you could use things like I have, who has, bingo, things like that, which could be whole class games. And then they utilize decodable texts as well. And then once or twice a week, students are completing a dictation, which includes sounds, words, and sentences. So one of the classes, Miss Elliott teaches a 3-4 multi-age class this year, and she gave me permission to share how she's designed her word study block. So she starts with a quick mini lesson. It's about 10 minutes typically, and then students go into small groups or centers. So her centers are not typical centers like we would traditionally think, but the students are doing different things at the same time. So one group might log into Lexia, one might do a word hunt, another might be doing decodable text with comprehension questions, and the final group will work with the teacher on an individual skill. So I'm finding that works really nicely, and the kids get to go through, they cycle throughout the week to all of those activities. And finally, our writer's workshop again begins with that grade level focus lesson. And then students go and try that strategy on a writing piece they've been working on or beginning something new. So again, I would encourage you to keep an ongoing anchor chart of the skills you've taught during the mini lessons so students can refer to it and develop their writing throughout their lessons. Students should have a choice of what they write about. So we're finding that brainstorming lists at the beginning of a unit is really helpful for many students. but you're going to find that some students may require a little bit more direction than that. So you might consider offering a few choices of topics to write about each day, which still allows that choice piece for every student. And finally, just like our reading block, sharing is so important for the students. They learn how to provide constructive feedback, as well as how to receive and utilize that feedback. So there's various ways I've seen teachers you do sharing. They might do it as a whole class. I have seen students share their writing on Flipgrid and have teachers and students respond to their writing that way. One-on-one conferencing with teachers. And I've also seen using a Google Doc with commenting on there. So those are just a couple of different ways that we've worked around the COVID situation that we're currently in.
Awesome. So I have one question. You were talking about blocks and then the writing workshop. Do those all happen in the same day? How long are each of those? How does that work in your daily schedule?
So most classrooms for our reading block, they have 75 minutes. And often the word work block is in that time. Some classes, the way the schedule worked out, may have a 60-minute reading block, and therefore they have a separate 20 to 30-minute word study block. And then the writing block is a separate block that is 30 to 45 minutes, depending on the class.
Lindsay, I think one of the things that you said, I think about there's so many challenges to, collaboration this year, especially, I think if we were all virtual, perhaps we may not have some of the same challenges because you can do breakout rooms and things like that. But with having face-to-face, that collaboration becomes really tricky. And I love that teachers are still doing like the think, pair, shares and things like that. And I witnessed that in the third grade classroom here. And it's just, as long as we're explicitly teaching those expectations, it works. So I love that. I love that teachers are finding ways to really include that.
Yeah. One thing I would add is the workshop model has really simplified things for teachers. And in a world of COVID where we're so overwhelmed by so many things, the simpler we can make it, the better. So I think that using the independent reading as your anchor activity means you're not running around trying to find different activities for kids to go to, but that they're spending their time reading. And we've seen such a change in kids with the increased amount of time of reading in the classroom. It's amazing. It really is amazing. So just simplifying everything has been great.
That's awesome.
So Lisa mentioned that she loved the idea of using Flipgrid for writing feedback. I was thinking the same thing when you were talking about that. I'm like, oh, what a great idea. Kudos.
I did that with our third grade classroom, actually. And I had not used Flipgrid before this other than as a participant. But I found it worked so well. The kids were so excited to share their writing and be able to listen to everybody's writing piece, not just one other student. And they were able to get teacher feedback and student feedback, and it worked really, really nicely.
And I think Flipgrid has come out with some like really cool new features that like they can share their screen in Flipgrid now, so they could pull up their Google Doc to show their writing. It allows them to comment via text and not just video anymore. So I think that Flipgrid has really expanded for kids.
That's great.
Lindsay, I was wondering about anchor charts. Do teachers just have anchor charts on poster paper hung up in the room, or do they find a way to digitize that for kids?
I think I have heard most people talk about doing it digitally. I would encourage you to have a paper copy hanging up in the classroom. I know that maybe we need to laminate our anchor charts, things like that. But I think having that as a big visual that kids can look at without having to go on their Chromebook and things like that, and just having them handy is really helpful. But I also think you need to have it digitally for your students who are remote. So there's that side of it as well.
True. Thinking about both of them.
Yeah. And it sets it up so if we did ever have to go fully remote or whatever, you have that both option. It's that thinking ahead piece. That's great.
Yeah. I was just thinking it's something that could easily go in a Google slide or even on a whiteboard thing, that because then you could
Absolutely.
project it in your classroom
Mm-hmm.
on your whiteboard and use it that way too.
Yeah.
But then you have it when you're online.
We shared so much. My mind is really.
I'm sorry.
No, please don't be sorry.
Oh.
This is fantastic. This is absolutely fantastic. I'm. Oh, were you gonna say something, Courtney?
No. Go. I'm gonna jot it down so I don't forget it.
Okay. Yeah, that's what happens to me. It's like, and then it's gone. So you were talking about like the turn and talk and how the kids are really getting into that, and how even the independent work, they're sitting and doing really well. What is it that you think makes that work so well?
I think keeping kids engaged in the topic is so critical, and making them feel like they have ownership over the work. So I found with, I started when I was in 3rd grade, really engaging read aloud chapter books and doing a lot of turning and talking about that. And kids were so excited about that. And then when we were working in their independent books, they were stopping and jotting, and they would share just one jot that they had during that time. And there was so much ownership over it. And what I found is, I've talked a lot about giving broad, open-ended questions. The students who struggle a little bit with what the grade level mini lesson was, they still have something to say. So all of your kids are talking. I'll go back to that character trait example. Some kids just don't have the vocabulary to identify those character traits as easily as others. So if you just ask them to talk about their character, there's something they're bound to know about it, something they like to do. So it just keeps the whole class on topic and engaged and feeling valued from the classroom.
That's great. Lisa's asking if you could share a little more about the formative assessment strategies that are built into this model.
Sure. So there's a lot of them in here. So stop and jots on their sticky notes you can use as formative assessments. If one sticky note is based on your mini lesson and one is anything that the kids want to share, you look at that one from your mini lesson, see where kids are on the progression, on the continuum of what they need to know in that grade level. They also often do extended responses at the end of the week. So they take those stop and jots and they write a letter to their teacher about their book. It doesn't necessarily have to be a letter, but that's one that kids find exciting. So you can look through there. Are they really picking up the skills and the ability to talk about books? There's also your one-on-one conferencing with kids. That's a formative assessment piece right there as well. And teachers being able to walk around and hear the students talk about the book. So there's so many different ways. There's observations, there's the written formative assessment, there's one-on-one conferencing. So it all works together nicely to gather that data.
How often does the one-on-one conferencing happen?
It depends. When it was just getting up and running, teachers were finding maybe the goal was to meet with one student a day. So it was taking them a little bit longer to get through it. But once they're getting more comfortable with the conferencing, we're looking at their class and deciding who needs to be conferenced with more often than others. And they're making a schedule based on that. So the answer is not clear cut, but it depends. But if students are reading for 30 minutes in the upper grades, teachers have 30 minutes to do quick 5 to 7 minute conferences with kids. There's actually a lot of time in there for teachers to be able to do that.
That's great. And you can learn a lot in that 5 to 7 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Lisa also says, for formative assessment, we know that assessing remote learners in particular has been new learning for our teachers this year. Yeah.
Yeah, so kind of going off of that, thinking about the stop and jots, Lindsay, and even like the turn and talks, how are remote learners participating in that end of things? So they have collaboration and contact with peers, and how does the teacher get the stop and jots?
So I've seen our 3rd grade teacher did digital Post-it notes, I think on Jamboard. if I remember correctly. And the students can go in there and type their Stop and Jots so that the teacher can have access to those. And I've seen teachers engage the remote learners differently. Sometimes if they have multiple remote learners, they buddy up the remote learners to talk to one another. I've also seen one teacher bring a computer over when they only have one remote learner to sit with another student and have conversations that way.
Awesome. And then my question from earlier was also about your remote kids, but thinking about independent books and choice books and things like that, what are those kiddos choosing from? Because we know that libraries at home might be very limited. So what are teachers using for books? I suppose for all students, are they going digital? Are they a mix? Kids can request things.
I'm finding that most teachers are assigning or are opening up the opportunity for Epic, which has a lot more choices on it than I remember when I was a classroom teacher. So that's evolved nicely, which is great. I would encourage, if there is the opportunity to send home physical books for some of these kids, to do that from time to time. But I do think Epic is a great place to get books from. Some teachers also utilize Reading A to Z to either print out those books or share digitally for kids. And I think that's true in school as well. A lot of teachers are using Epic. One of the cautions I would give is that, particularly in the younger grades, students who need to point to the words as they read, reading it on the computer is not as easy for them. So finding those physical books is critical for them, I believe.
I think there's something to be said about having a physical book in your hand too.
Yes.
You know, are there any other resources that teachers are finding to be really helpful during ELA block? Phonics or writing resources or anything like that?
I've found a lot of, I know we caution teachers again on Teachers Pay Teachers, be careful what you find on there, but there are a lot of digital resources there. I had previously purchased a unit that had all phonics games, and they've turned those into digital games. So there are things out there that are good resources like that. Not so much COVID related, but the Oakland schools has on their website, they have units of study already built in, which can help just gather ideas based on your grade level for writing and reading. So that's been a great resource as we build our units of study.
I think we'll have to make sure to link some of these resources to the video.
Sure.
So one question that came to my mind is, we've talked about some of these digital tools for like Stop and Jots and things for third grade and up. Do you find it more difficult in, say, the K-2 environment? And what sorts of strategies are they using there?
I think kindergarten in particular, I think, is more talking than writing when they're stopping and thinking about that. First grade, we don't have as many remote learners. So I haven't seen that in action, honestly. So I think it depends. But I think in the lower grades, it's a lot more talking and just getting them to come up with their ideas and be able to articulate those ideas, and the writing part will come. But I don't know that Jamboard would necessarily work so well with kindergarten.
Right.
Flipgrid could work well with them because they could just talk.
Mm-hmm.
That'd be perfect.
I was thinking about that.
Yeah. So Lisa just shared, absolutely, a lot of the local libraries for remote learners, they can get books. They're offering like curbside pickup or delivery, and they can get access through interlibrary loan if they don't have it locally. Yeah, great idea. Thank you, Lisa.
And to get back to Epic, with our book clubs, typically we would have physical books, but I think most teachers are choosing books from Epic for it, so that remote students have access, and in the event that we were ever to go remote, hopefully we don't, but we have access to those. And like I said, there are so many options on there that teachers have been able to find great books for that.
Yeah. And I know within the Epic system now, you can pick out a text and assign it to your class.
Yes.
And
Yep.
There's other things too, like news ELA or Newsella, however people pronounce it differently. But those are options too, because you can share those digitally or them out.
The other
I know
one,
a lot of. No, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. The other one is ReadWorks. That was really popular in the spring. Even really great for younger kids. They could go on and listen to various texts and either jot down notes that they have of their thinking. There was actually a spot for that could be shared with the teacher. So lots of different, particularly nonfiction articles, but there's great fiction stories on there as well that I know teachers were using a lot.
I was going to say that a lot of the other teachers in schools are using the Reading A to Z or the Raz Kids version of that, and that's a great option too. It is a paid, but you can share, and there's so many options. You can print books, make copies, you can share them digitally. They have lesson plans even for some of them, and there's closed readings, all sorts of things. So lots of great options out there for remote and in person.
I have to say I'm excited to see the book clubs and to see how that works, especially in the younger grades. And I'm like, my mind is thinking, and I'm wondering if we can like sneak in on some lessons and record some, like make a documentary of how it goes so that other people can see, because there's going to be some navigation there.
Yes.
I think it's going to be excellent. So we might have to touch base, Lindsay, on that one.
Absolutely. And I'm really excited about it. This is the first of 2 book clubs that we have scheduled for the year. So this is just kind of figuring it all out. And then the next time hopefully will be a little smoother. But kids are going to be able to name their book club and have some ownership over that. So I think it'll be really fun and engaging for them.
I love it. And I'll tell you though, the rough, messy stuff, that's where like all the learning is. So that's like the stuff that I think needs to be shared, because that's the good stuff.
Absolutely. Well, we only have a few more minutes. So are there any parting thoughts, questions?
I think, like I said, just trying to simplify your instruction, take a little stress off your plate, give the kids the time to do the work instead of having the teacher do all the work. I know we're in an interesting situation right now, but it's doable. If anyone has any questions and wants to reach out, I'm happy to talk to anybody. So feel free.
Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you so much for joining us. We have been looking forward to this. We're really excited. And we would love to hear from other people too. If you have great thoughts and ideas and things are working really well in your schools, let us know so that we can share it out with everyone. And Lisa says, thank you. Great resources and ideas. Agreed. Thank you, Lindsay. This was awesome.
Thanks for having me.
All right. All right. That's another episode. We'll see you guys next week.